Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session on creating business development plans for law firms. My name is Trina Saunders. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Action Step. You might ask yourself why a software marketing person is talking to you about law firm business development plans. Well, the answer is that in a prior life, I ran marketing and business development for a number of large law firms in the US and in Europe. So as part of that role, I would have led practice planning initiatives annually with over 20 plus practices in each firm. And so we would have utilized the process that I'm going to talk to you about today. I have to admit that occasionally my practice leaders would groan audibly when they saw the marketing and business development planning materials arrive in their inbox each year. But that said, it really gave us a great focus and structure as a leadership team to be able to plan and track growth and success for each of our practice areas, but also overall as a firm. So what are we going to cover today? First of all, we're going to look at the purpose of business development plans. So why are you putting this plan together for your practice or for your firm? We're also going to look at key reports and information that give you a really good backdrop to putting together a strong plan. We're going to talk about things like practice dynamics, targeting the right prospects, goal setting, and how you measure those goals. And then we're going to take an overall look at the fundamentals of a BD plan. And also, what's next? Once you have your plan in place, what's the next thing you need to do? So why do you need a really good business development plan for your practice? There are three main reasons, the three P's of business development planning. The first is priorities, the second, profitability, and the third, problems. The actual process of business development planning forces you and your team to set priorities. Everyone has to agree to them. Everybody's agreeing to focus on them for the coming year. So in my view, the best thing about setting priorities is that you rule a lot of things out. So you actually get back a lot of time. All the time that you typically would have spent on examining ad hoc marketing and business development opportunities that people might put in front of you, you get that back. If it's not aligned to the plan, it doesn't need consideration. And in my experience, that was the biggest impediment to meeting growth goals at the law firms I worked with. Lack of focus, just being spread too thin and watering down your potential impact. So on to your profitability. Again, the work that goes into practice planning just makes you look at the underlying profitability of different client types, different practice areas, different teams. And let me tell you, there can be some surprises in there. There are often practices that might not look like the biggest revenue generators initially, but because of their clients or the way they process their work or the team, they have a better profit margin. They have a better realization rate. So they might not be the heroes as everybody sees them, but they're actually there doing really well in the background. So part of the purpose of BD planning is to see those opportunities for further investment in areas that already have great ROI, as well as identifying improvements to underperforming practices. Finally, problems. Again, creating BD plans makes you look at reports. It makes you think about client relationships in ways that you don't normally do on a day-to-day basis. By looking at those things, you start to see patterns, you start to see anomalies, and then you want to dig in and find out why. So it's really just good discipline and can really help you uncover problems in practice management or in how clients are being managed in different practices, or potentially, individual issues with specific people. So that's why we do it. Now let's move on to how. So before you start digging into the actual creation of your business development plan, you need to do some homework. Essentially, it's about arming yourself with the information you need to make decisions. Before you put pen to paper, getting the data you need and having broader firm-wide conversations about the health of your firm and its practices will help you to build the right plan. So I've laid out here the key reports and materials that I think you need in order to be clear about what's happened before, what's happening with their clients, what opportunities there might be, and what are some of the client dynamics that you need to think about in order to create your plan. So essentially, there are four key reports that typically you'll get from your finance people or from your practice manager. The first one is the practice fee report. So this is a breakdown of all your practices and the revenue across those. And typically you would look at those trending over 3 years. So you can start to see which practices are actually growing, what practices might be slightly in decline, and start to have conversations about the reasons for that. What are the underlying things that are going on in each of these practices that are causing that growth or not? The second one is the client fee report. So this essentially is a breakdown of your top clients by practice area. So you can see across the relationships for your different clients, who they're engaged with, who in your firm is billing them, and how embedded they are essentially across your different practice areas. It's a really good report to show you the stability of your client base, as well as the stability of some of your practice areas. It gives you a sense of the depths of relationships that your different key clients might have. And it's also a really good way to see some vulnerabilities or opportunities for cross-selling. So if you see a key client who really hasn't been billed that much from particular practice areas over the last number of years, you know that that's an opportunity to start working with that client and cross-selling other services or seeing if there's any underlying issues there. The third report then is a comparison of WIP versus build. So this is a great way to see how efficient are my different teams, how efficient are my different practice areas. It can also really help you identify knowledge gaps or opportunities to create processes that make things more efficient. Sometimes when there's a big gap between WIP and build, it means that people are climbing too high a hill in terms of knowledge. They just don't have the information or the knowledge they need to be able to execute the work efficiently. Maybe there's training issues there. Or maybe actually it's a project scoping issue. Maybe the quote was agreed too early in the process before the project had really been scoped fully. So those are sorts of the things that I think that report can really give you insight into. And it's a really important one. The next one then is what you spent previously on business development and looking at the spread of spend across the different types of business development and marketing activities. The main thing here is, can you actually track results back to what you spent previously? And if you can't, actually that's pretty good information to go into the business development planning process with anyway. You obviously want to create a plan that is really, really traceable, that's really measurable, and that has very clear goals so that you know exactly what it is you're trying to do. The next report that I have here, utilization, is one that people don't necessarily think about in relation to business development planning. But the reason why it's important is that you need to be able to resource your business development plan. So you need people to actually execute on the plan that you have put in place. And I suppose the thing to look at there is, who are super busy in your firm or who have free time. And are the people who are super busy or the people who have free time the ones that you actually want to be doing the business development work? So for example, you might have some rising stars in your junior team that you really want to get more profile, or you might have well-known partners that are helpful to have there out in the marketplace and visible in the marketplace. But if they're maxed out on client work, they're not going to be able to give the time required to fulfill your business development plan. So there's two things you can do. You can obviously try and free them up and make sure that they do have time to do more of that business development work. Or you can look at the people who might be a little bit quieter and look at how they can either pick up some extra work from those people who you want to be more focused on business development. Or you can enable those people who are quieter to commit to helping a little bit more with the background work related to business development. That is an important report and gives you real insight into how people are working. Finally, just having a really consistent business development template is helpful. Even if you're a small firm, having a template that you can use across your different practice areas. You might be sharing people across different practice areas. It might be the same people working on different areas of law. But having a plan for each practice area is important, and having a template that's consistent and becomes familiar to people so that it's easy then to keep looking back at it and tracking over time. So it should be simple, it should be familiar to people, and it should be specific. So those are the things that you really need to have and the homework that you need to do, examining these reports, having these materials in place before you actually get into the business development planning process. So I wanted to raise practice dynamics. It's really important in your business development process that you're thinking about practice dynamics. So what do I actually mean by that? These are essentially things that are outside of the control of you or individual people within your firm or teams. But you do need to consider them more broadly as a firm because they have significant impact on revenue. So while you might not be able to control them, you definitely need to be aware of them and ideally have planned contingencies in place for them. So some examples of these are typical things that you would come across are practices that complement each other. So certain practices will always be reliant on other practices for a certain percentage of their work. Internal referrals, cross-sells are key to their stability. So an example of that might be a firm who do a lot of corporate mergers and acquisitions. They would typically feed a steady flow of work to employment practice area, to IP practice area, to the finance practice area. And a firm that does a lot of conveyancing, for example, might refer or cross-sell their estate planning services to clients. So then if the referring practice obviously takes a dip in their work, there's a huge knock-on effect to those other practices. The overall impact on your firm could be much greater. So what do you do to mitigate this? How do you find other sources of work for those practices that are reliant? Because there isn't much you can do about the practices who are feeding them the work if it's a market issue. But there's more that you can do potentially to build other sources of work for those reliant practices. The next thing then is looking at changing market opportunities or challenges. These again are obviously outside of your control, but you can leverage your firm's advantage around them. Do you have somebody in your firm who is tasked with keeping an eye on things like regulatory developments or market movement or economic factors? And how do you communicate that sort of information to your practice or your practice leaders? You need to stay informed. As practice leaders, you need to stay informed, and you're able then to be more prepared for changing market conditions. So you might see them as opportunities or threats. For example, COVID saw a rise in estate planning, it saw a rise in insurance law, it saw a rise in family law, but it saw a dip in things like conveyancing and corporate transactions for a time. Obviously, none of us can predict a pandemic, but there are always bubbles and changes and movements in the market, and keeping an eye on those things is really important so that you can identify your potential for being more adaptable as these things happen without your control. Another example of this would be thinking about the health of your client's business. So being really aware of what's happening with your own clients can really help you be prepared and not be surprised by things that might happen to them, which then has a knock-on effect to your practice. For example, if you're particularly exposed to any one sector or any one type of client, what are the things that are happening in that sector? What are the things that are happening with that type of client at the moment? Are you aware? Do you have people really thinking about that? First of all, can you leverage that sector-specific expertise with things like case studies, testimonials, turn that into an opportunity? On the flip side, what if something challenging happens in that sector to reduce their requirements for legal services? So that's looking at client health by sector or by grouping, but actually just even on a client-by-client basis, especially thinking about your top clients, the people that you absolutely can't lose as clients. If you start to see the assignments are dropping or that bills are going unpaid, it's obviously a sign of distress. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the problem is with your firm. Maybe that particular client is just struggling financially or has something else going on in their business. So reaching out to them and asking them what you can do to help, what you can do to support them, playing the long game so that that client makes sure that client knows that you are thinking about them. They will be more loyal than ever in the future if you do that. So those are just some of the practice dynamics that are worth discussing while you build your business development plan. And the typical way that people look at things like this is by doing a SWOT analysis. So looking at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. It's a really good way to uncover many of these practice dynamics. And you should do this from every practice area. So every practice area plan that you put together should have a SWOT in it. It doesn't really matter, again, how big or small your firm is, or whether there's overlap, or some repeating strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats across the practices. You can use this as a basis for discussion and reflection, and just include it in summary form. It doesn't need to be particularly detailed in your business development plan. And it should be the structure and the guide for what you then decide to do within your plan. So in addition to the SWOT exercise, which will have helped you define some of the market opportunities that you want to focus on from a business development point of view, looking at your current client roster should also help you to define your target prospects and help you understand where you're going to focus your business development efforts. So simply start with your list of current clients broken down by fees billed. It might not be your full client list. You might, depending on the size of your firm, you might want to look at your top 20, 50, 100, whatever it might be. But even just doing that and looking at that list of clients by fees billed, maybe over the last number of years, doing that is very insightful. Whenever I have done this exercise with groups of lawyers in the past, there are always these aha moments where they realize that actually the clients who they thought were their best clients haven't been for years. The billables haven't been there for years. And sometimes it's just that they're still busy with them, or they just have this perception of past work. So it's really important to do that on a regular basis and make sure you really understand what's happening with your clients. So when you look at that top 20 or that top 50, are there commonalities in that client base in terms of industry, in terms of business size, in terms of age or location of those people? The other thing to think about is, what do those clients look like from a reference value point of view? Are these people who are willing to provide testimonials about your firm, or to refer a colleague, or to refer a friend or another business? Or are they pretty well-known companies? Or are they companies in your target sectors, sectors that you really, really want to grow your market share in? So having those sorts of referenceable clients are going to be helpful to you, even if they're not the biggest billers in the world. Think about the strength of the different client relationships within that list. Are you able to see common factors for building strong working relationships within your practice? Think about work quality. Is it sophisticated work that you do for these different clients? Because that kind of work can really help to build your reputation and can absolutely help you to become well known for that area of work. Or is it work that you can build a really good, efficient process around? So it's repeatable work that you can develop a really good process around and therefore have a fantastic profit margin on that type of work. And then finally, the last thing I would look at is, what is the likelihood for further work from each of these clients? How likely is it that they're going to come back to you for more legal work in the future? Do you have any sense of what their legal budget looks like? So ideally, when you look at your clients through these different lenses, you will see an overlap between which clients you've put into those different categories. And the types of companies and individuals that you work best with will be clear from doing that exercise. And those should be your priority targets. The great thing about this exercise is that it also gives you a great list of your absolutely key clients that you have to mind, that you have to take care of, that are really important to your practice. Okay, so we're going to get to goal setting, but let's just do a quick check-in on where we are. So you have the information you need from the key reports that you've looked at in order to be able to make decisions. You've identified some potential market opportunities from the SWOT analysis that was done. You understand at a deeper level some of the practice dynamics that are going on and some of the market dynamics. And you know who you're targeting from looking at your client list, from looking at the market opportunities. You know who you're targeting, and you also know which clients you're minding. So now let's dig into what the actual plan looks like. So looking at the creation of the plan itself, the first thing that you're going to want to do is to set some goals. And although it's the first thing, it would probably be the last thing as well. You're going to come back to it, you're going to tweak it over time. But first of all, just start thinking about what those goals should look like before you start developing the other areas of the plan. So what goals should you actually set? Like, what are the areas that you should be thinking about in terms of goal setting? You should absolutely have some revenue goals in there. You can break that down in any number of ways. It might be an overall revenue goal that you then break down by client or by client type or by sector, but make sure that you have some pretty good detail in there and that you can build it from the ground up so that it's realistic. You should absolutely have some goals around client type or the sector that you're targeting so that you have a really good idea about the impact of that particular type of client on your overall revenue. You should have a really good sense of the type of work that you want your practice to be doing and what that breaks down like. Do you need a particular type of work for your junior lawyers to keep them busy, to help to train them up? Do you need a particular type of work for your experienced partners? And what's the balance of that across your practice? How much of each of those things is going to be represented in your overall revenue target? You should be thinking about market share and position. So what do you want to be known for in the market? Are there competitors that you go head to head with again and again? How do you position yourselves against them? How are you better than them? Why do clients choose you over them? And what are your goals? Are you, is it that you're going to be, better known than one of your competitors? Is it that you're going to gain some market share with a particular group of clients? So have some really good goals around market share and position. Profile. So identify the team members within your practice that you want to spearhead your business development efforts, essentially. You want them to be visible in the marketplace. It's helpful for the firm for them to be visible. So what areas of expertise within your practice do you need to profile? Are there particular pieces of work that are particularly interesting to the clients or the targets that you're going after? So how are you going to go and develop that profile and identify the goals for profile here? And then team roles. Agree who in your team is going to do what. Who is person A, person B, and person C, and what are they going to be responsible for doing? And that means that you always are able to come back and hold people accountable to what it is that you wanted them to do. Once you've set your high-level business development goals, it's time to get into the meat of the plan itself. So I'm going to take you through a summary of some of the key elements that you should be including in your business development plans for each of your practice areas. And it starts with three main things. Who do you have to mind? And these are your key clients. Who would you love to win? And these are your key targets. And who do you need to reward? So your key referral sources. And how you treat these is to simply identify for each of those categories what you need to do for each of them. So you'll identify maybe for clients 3 to 10 key clients that represent a significant percentage of your practice. You can't lose these. So what are you going to do to make sure that you don't? Targets. Select a handful of target organizations or target groups of people and detail who's going to own that, who's going to actually engage with those particular targets, what sort of routes of access you have to those targets, and what's the rationale. So what's your proposition as opposed to anybody else? How are you going to replace another law firm? And then referral sources. Take a look. When you had a look at that client list, you will have seen, okay, this client came from this referral source. This client who's really valuable came from another client source. So looking at those referral sources and really understanding where some of your work is coming from is key. You need to take care of those referral sources. You need to track who's sending you work and either send them work back or send them a thank you or show them that you appreciate what they're doing. So for each of those three areas, what you really want to do is make sure that you have some really key SMART actions. I'm sure you've all heard of SMART before: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed, so that you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So how this might look is something like this. You'll have 3 tables in your plan: one for clients, one for targets, one for referrals. And you'll break it down by key contacts, what the opportunity is, what your very specific goals are for that very specific client, who the lead partner is or who the lead person is in your practice to look after this particular contact, and then what actions you're going to take. What are the immediate actions and longer term actions you're going to take to look after that client or that target or referral. So this is not an exhaustive list. We're talking about maybe 5 top clients, 5 key targets, 5 referral sources. You're not going to put in a table of everybody. And again, that's all about focus. You can print off these tables, you can stick them up at your desk so you know exactly what you should be doing on a day-to-day basis from a business development point of view. The next thing you're going to include in your plan is your overall marketing and business development approach. So your target client, your target prospects are going to be your guiding light. Everything you do from a marketing or business development point of view should be geared towards them. So what you want to do here is detail the types of marketing activity that's going to give us the best access to those target sectors or those target client types. Where do those people exist? Where do those companies gather, either physically or virtually? So in this section of the plan, you're going to include some detail on the mix of marketing channels that you'll use to access and build profile with your target prospects. It'll be a mix of different things. It could be sponsorships, it could be social communications, it could be webinars or workshops that you want to run for this particular group of prospects. And a really important thing I want to mention is networking. Networking is always going to be a big part of business development. You can have the biggest marketing budget in the world, but if you're not out there in the marketplace actively cultivating relationships, that marketing is going to fall on deaf ears. People want to do business with people who they know and they trust, and that's never going to change. even if we're in a much more virtual world nowadays, there still are opportunities to get involved. It might be getting involved in associations or in the boards of organizations. It could be in a charity, but just looking for opportunities to engage a little bit more deeply with groups of people that are relevant to your practice area. So now we're getting very specific. So I know there's a lot of words on the slide here, but I just wanted to have all the detail on each of these slides so that you can take this away afterwards and use it to help build your plan. So there are 4 other areas that you really should include in your business development plan. Number 1 is a calendar activity. So just have things broken down by month and what you're going to do on a monthly basis to support your overall goals. Number 2, having a sense of budget. What budget do you have allocated to business development and to marketing? And how is that broken down between different activities? Information and knowledge. So this is about detailing some of the dependencies that you have from, this could be anything from, brochures that you need. It could be information that you need from colleagues. It could be an introduction from your colleagues. So it's just an area to detail, like these are the things that I need to be able to develop business in the areas that I have said I want to. And then the last thing is internal communication. We mentioned assigning roles at the start when we talked about goals. But this is really about how you're going to share progress with that team, how that team is going to communicate some of the hurdles or some of the successes that they're seeing, and how they are going to be tracking and measuring results for everybody to see. So all of that detail was essentially a summary of the fundamentals of a good business development plan for law firms and for each of the practice area within law firms. So you will include a SWOT. You will have some really good focus on target prospects. You'll set some very specific goals. You'll detail the approach you're going to take to reach those goals. You're going to note specific activity for each of those areas, and you're going to have a budget that you try and stick to and spend. So assuming that you've actually gone through that process and you now have business development plans for each of your practice areas within your firm, what's next? So the main thing is to view that plan as a living document. It's something that you and your team should put your heads together around on a monthly basis so that you're able to track and measure activity against your goals. Follow up with the people who committed to doing certain things. Make sure that they are actually following through. And actually a really good way to do this is to make sure that they have their own individual business development plans to align with the overall practice plan. And then the final thing is make sure you're spending your budget. If you've detailed what you're going to spend your budget on, and that's rolling up to the goals that you've identified, then if you're spending your budget, you're doing the right things and you're closer to your goal of meeting whatever revenue targets you have. So that's it for me. It was a pleasure talking you through business development planning for law firms today. If you have any questions, please use the chat function on this webinar platform, or feel free to email the marketing team here at Action Step, and we'll be happy to come back to you on email. Thank you.